The morning air felt heavy and stagnant, mirroring the sense of despair that seemed to cling to everything. Trevor glanced at his pistol, conflicted by the sight of the 3 remaining bullets. He hesitated, wondering if he should count the 4th one with the dented casing, knowing it might jam the chamber. He glanced at the group standing beside their rusty truck, each of them carrying that familiar look, hungry eyes, fingers that never quite relaxed, and shoulders permanently hunched as if expecting the sky to fall. Another supply run, another chance to die, another day without finding Toby. "We're burning daylight," Gustav muttered, his military-bred impatience showing through the scars on his weathered face. He tapped the stock of his rifle against the truck's dented fender. The sound echoed across the clearing, bouncing between the cabin walls and the surrounding pines. Trevor nodded. "Elijay's about 20 miles. Should take us an hour if the roads are clear." "When are the roads ever clear?" Anthony said, adjusting his glasses. His hands were steady, but his eyes darted nervously toward the tree line. The scientist never looked comfortable outside. There's always something. Dead things, abandoned vehicles, other survivors. Nordberg spat on the ground. "Rather deal with the dead than the living these days." "You always say that," Bobby said, his voice soft despite his bulk. "Then you complain when the dead try to eat your face." Archer, who had been quiet until now, hefted his crossbow higher on his shoulder. "Stop your bitching, I know this place. Emma's Diner, just off the main strip in Elijay. Stopped there 100 times on my way up to the cabin before everything went to shit." Trevor leaned against the truck. "What makes you so sure there's anything left? Place has probably been picked clean." Archer's lips curved into something that once resembled a smile. Emma and her husband were paranoid even before the dead started walking. They had a shelter built beneath the house behind the diner, stockpiled everything, canned goods, medical supplies, ammunition. Called her crazy back then. He paused. "Guess she had the last laugh." "You think she's still there?" Bobby asked, hope coloring his voice. Archer's non-answer was answer enough. "Never had reason to check it before," Archer continued, adjusting the strap of his crossbow. "Had my own supplies up here, was self-sufficient until you lot showed up." There was no malice in his words, just the resigned acceptance of a loner who'd accidentally found himself part of a group. Trevor counted heads. 7 of them going, himself, Gustav, Nordberg, Bobby, Anthony, Harrison, and Archer. 5 staying behind, Kylie, Peter, Harry, Bob, Brown, and Helmet. The division of labor made sense. A larger group might attract unwanted attention, but too few would be vulnerable on the road. "Let's move," Trevor said, opening the driver's side door. The others piled in, weapons balanced across knees, bags at their feet to fill with whatever bounty they might find. As they prepared to leave, Peter approached the driver's window. His thin frame seemed fragile in the harsh morning light. "Be careful out there," he said, his voice barely audible above the engine's idle rumble. Trevor nodded. "You too. Don't let Harry and Bob slack off on those potatoes." Peter's laugh was hollow. "They're already arguing about the best way to turn soil." From across the yard, Bob Brown's voice carried on the still air. "You're doing it wrong, you idiot. You'll kill the whole crop that way." Harry's response was colorful and anatomically improbable. "At least they're keeping busy," Trevor said. "What about you? Hunting?" Peter nodded, tapping the knife at his belt. "Now that the bear's gone, might find some deer. Helmet thinks he saw tracks down by the stream. Just don't go too far," Trevor warned. "Stay within shouting distance of the cabin." Peter's eyes darkened. "After Nashville, I know better than to wander." Trevor felt the familiar twist in his gut at the mention of Nashville, the place he lost Toby. Every day that passed made it less likely he'd find him, but he couldn't let go. Janelle's last words still haunted him. Find him, keep him safe. A promise he hadn't been able to keep. "We'll be back before dark," Trevor said, shifting the truck into gear. As they pulled away, Trevor watched in the rearview mirror as the remaining group spread out across the yard. Bob and Harry were on their knees in the dirt, still arguing. Helmet stood at the edge of the clearing, peering into the woods with his rifle ready. Kylie and Peter lingered in the yard, watching the truck until it disappeared around the bend. "Tell us more about this Emma," Gustav finally said, his voice cutting through the hum of the engine. "She ex-military?" Archer shook his head. "Just a regular person who saw the writing on the wall before most. Husband was one of those doomsday preppers. Died of cancer 2 years before everything went to shit. She kept up his work, though. Said it made her feel close to him. Love makes people do strange things," Anthony mused, staring out the window at a corpse sprawled across a mailbox, its flesh blackened and tight against protruding bones. "So does fear," Nordberg countered, "and there's plenty of that to go around these days." The road stretched before them, cracked and littered with the forgotten debris of civilization. Abandoned cars, scattered belongings, and occasionally the desiccated remains of those who hadn't made it. They rounded the corner where the dusty road bent away from town, exhaust kicking up clouds that hung suspended like ghosts in the humid air. Trevor squinted through the cracked windshield, the familiar landscape sliding past until something unexpected caught his eye. Their overturned truck, the one they'd abandoned a week or so ago, lay on its roof like a dead beetle, wheels still spinning lazily in the breeze. Trevor's foot eased off the accelerator as the memory hit him with stomach-churning clarity. "Shit," he muttered, knuckles whitening on the steering wheel. "We forgot about Sid and Nancy." The silence in the truck turned solid, like concrete setting around them. Gustav leaned forward, his scarred forearm resting on the dashboard. "The couple," he said, not a question but a confirmation of their collective failure. "She was pregnant," Bobby whispered from the back seat, his voice cracking. "We made them a bed." Their makeshift sanctuary had been cobbled together in the chaos of that night. Blankets on the truck bed, promises to return, a desperate attempt at decency in an indecent world. The night of the herd, the night they'd all barely escaped with their lives. "There!" Anthony pointed toward the road ahead, his finger trembling slightly. 2 figures. Trevor slowed the truck to a crawl. Through the heat haze rising from the asphalt, 2 forms shambled forward with the broken, jerky gait that had become horrifyingly familiar. One tall and lanky, the other smaller with what had once been a feminine silhouette now distorted by trauma and death. "Stop here," Archer said. "Don't get closer." Trevor brought the truck to a halt. None of them moved to exit the vehicle. They merely watched through the dusty windshield as the 2 figures staggered forward, unaware or uncaring of their audience. Sid had been a young man with a nervous smile and quick eyes that constantly scanned for danger. Those eyes were now clouded and vacant, rolling in sunken sockets. His left arm hung mangled at his side, great chunks of flesh missing to expose yellowed bone beneath tattered skin. Blood, long dried to a rust-brown crust, stained what remained of his plaid shirt. His jaw worked mechanically, teeth clicking together with each vacant step. Nancy moved alongside him, though moved was perhaps too generous a word for her lurching gait. Where her stomach had once swelled with new life, there now gaped a ragged cavity, split open like overripe fruit. Loops of intestines swung from the wound, dragging along the ground, leaving a trail of blackened fluid on the concrete. Her once pretty face was a mask of congealed blood, her blonde hair matted into stiff spikes that jutted from her scalp like cruel thorns. But it was what trailed behind her that froze the breath in their lungs. Connected by a glistening cord that stretched 3 meters back was a tiny form, no larger than a loaf of bread, dragging lifelessly along the ground. The infant, torn prematurely from its mother's womb, had somehow become infected as well. Its miniature limbs twitched with terrible purpose as it was pulled along by its grotesque umbilical tether. "Jesus Christ," breathed Nordberg, for once finding no humor in the horror before them. Trevor felt bile rise in his throat. He'd seen countless atrocities since the world ended, men torn apart while still screaming, children devoured by their own parents, piles of corpses so high they'd needed ladders to climb them. But this struck at something primal in him. His mind flashed to Toby, to Janelle, to promises made and broken. "Look at their hands," Gustav said quietly. Through some miracle of muscle memory, or perhaps something deeper than the infection could erase, Sid and Nancy's hands remained clasped together. Fingers intertwined, they walked through death as they had through life, connected. Their knuckles were skinned raw, exposed tendons visible through rotting flesh, yet still they held on. Anthony leaned forward, his scientific mind temporarily overriding his horror. "Fascinating," he murmured. "I wonder if there is some residual neural activity that preserves certain behaviors from before infection. Or maybe they just died holding hands and rigor mortis did the rest," Archer countered, his voice flat and firm. "Holy shit," Gustav suddenly said, turning to Nordberg with wide, almost manic eyes. "Talk about commitment, huh? Till death do us part ain't got nothing on these two." Nordberg's lips curled into a wry grin, though his eyes remained haunted. "You know, I never gave it much thought on the night, but she looks a lot like a girl I hooked up with a while back." His gaze drifted to the tiny form dragging behind Nancy. "But that kid ain't mine." They both chuckled, the sound hollow and desperate, the laughter of men trying to distance themselves from horror through gallows humor. Bobby glared at them. "Show some respect," he hissed. "Respect," Nordberg countered. "They're walking corpses. They don't give a shit about respect." "They were people," Bobby insisted. "People we promised to help." Gustav rested a heavy hand on Bobby's shoulder. "People die. Promises die with them. Nothing to be done about it now." "We should put them down," Bobby said, checking his weapon. "It's what we'd want someone to do for us." "No," Trevor said, finally breaking his silence. "We leave them." The others turned to him in surprise. "They're not threatening us," Trevor continued. "They're not attacking anyone. They're just walking." "It's not about threat," Bobby argued. "It's about mercy." Trevor's eyes remained fixed on the couple. "Is it mercy to separate them? Even in death they have each other. That's more than most of us can say." The truck fell silent as they considered his words. Outside, Sid and Nancy continued their journey, unaware of the debate their existence had sparked. Trevor started the engine again. "We have supplies to gather, a group waiting for us, and daylight burning. We can't save everyone." The last words were as much for himself as for the others. As they drove past, giving the walkers a wide berth, Trevor allowed himself one last glance. Sid and Nancy didn't turn to follow the truck. They didn't change their course or speed. They simply continued their slow, painful trek to nowhere, hands clasped in a final, terrible solidarity. "There's a dirt road up ahead," Gustav said, unfolding a creased map. "We can take it to circle around, avoid the main routes back." Trevor nodded, grateful for the practical distraction. But Anthony remained fixated on the couple, turning in his seat to watch them until they disappeared from view. The truck trundled along the cracked asphalt, veering onto white path after Trevor decided that cutting through it was less risky than taking the more direct road to Elijah. Ever since they'd left Sid and Nancy, silence had hung heavy inside the cab, an unspoken burden echoing with everything they'd seen and done. Then, out of the stillness, Archer's voice cut through with three short, almost surreal words. "There's a plane." For a moment, Trevor thought his ears were deceiving him. The notion was as outlandish as someone announcing they'd glimpsed a unicorn. He stole a glance in the rearview mirror and met Archer's steady, unblinking gaze. "What did you say?" Harrison demanded, disbelief edging his tone. "Plane," Archer repeated firmly, pointing through the passenger window. 10 o'clock. A small Cessna." all eyes shot upward, necks strained toward the sky in a collective, almost forgotten gesture. Initially, Trevor saw nothing but an endless blue, free of any trails that once marked the busy airways of the old world. Then his eyes caught it, a diminutive white aircraft banking low over the pines, its spinning propeller catching the sunlight in rhythmic flashes. "Son of a bitch," Gustav murmured, the words carrying a mix of awe and prayer. Trevor drew the truck to the roadside, tires crunching over gravel and dead leaves as the engine ground to a halt. Doors swung open and the survivors spilled out, clustering together and tilting their heads back to watch this surreal sight. "It's towing something," Anthony observed, shielding his eyes from the glare. The plane circled again, descending further so that the pilot's silhouette could be made out behind the glass cockpit. A white banner fluttered at its tail, the dark letters stark against the faded fabric. "Jasper is safe," Bobby read aloud, his voice trembling. "Did you see that? It says Jasper is safe." "Jasper's about 20 miles south," Nordberg added. "I used to break up drunk drivers along that route." The aircraft looped back once more as if to reassure them that the message was real. Its engine's drone filled the quiet landscape, a sound from the past that tightened Trevor's chest with unexpected emotion. "Could be a trap," Gustav warned, never taking his eyes off the aircraft, luring survivors in to relieve them of their gear. "Or it might be genuine," Bobby countered. "Maybe there's a community rebuilding a safe zone." "There's no such thing anymore," Harrison muttered, though his gaze stayed fixed on the plane, hungry for hope. Anthony adjusted his glasses, his mind already working through the logistics. A functioning aircraft like that suggests serious resources. Fuel, technical expertise, a secured runway, and enough manpower to defend it, Gustav interjected. Trevor watched the plane's steady loop, trying to decipher its meaning. Jasper safe. Two simple words that now sounded like a foreign language. Thoughts turned to Toby. If organized survivors existed, perhaps there were records, systems, plans to reunite lost loved ones. Then a subtle shift in the aircraft's engine note caught Archer's attention. "Something's wrong," he said, pointing as a thin trail of dark smoke began to stream from the rear. "Maybe it's hydraulic fluid leaking or an oil loss," Anthony offered. They watched as the plane's path grew erratic, its wings dipping and rising as the pilot fought for control. The banner still fluttered behind it, a message of safety now tinged with cruel irony. "He's going down," Gustav declared flatly. The plane slipped behind a ridge of pine trees, the banner trailing behind like a surrender flag. They all held their breath, expecting a violent impact, an explosion, a conflagration. But nothing happened. There was no crash, no fiery burst, only the abrupt silence as the engine's hum vanished. "He managed a clean emergency landing," Archer said with reluctant respect. Trevor was already returning to the truck. "We need to investigate." "What about Elijah?" Harrison asked, though he fell in line with Trevor's decision. "And the diner." "The diner can wait," Trevor replied as he slid into the driver's seat. "It'll be there another hour." No one argued. The possibility of encountering organized survivors capable of maintaining an aircraft and providing a semblance of hope was too compelling to ignore. Trevor steered the truck toward the spot where the plane had vanished. "You really think it's real?" Bobby asked from the back seat, his voice low and cautious. "That is a haven or sanctuary?" "Define safe or sanctuary," Gustav countered. "Are we talking walled perimeters, armed defenses, or mere absence of infection?" "Those aren't the same." Anthony leaned forward. "The message is revealing. It isn't a call for help or a distress signal, it's a recruitment drive. That suggests someone has confidence in infrastructure. Or it could be a really clever trap," Nordberg added, scratching his stubbled chin. Silence fell as Trevor maneuvered down a winding road toward an open field where the plane had come to a stop. The trees grew thick along the roadside, their branches raking the truck's sides like desperate fingernails. "There," Archer announced, pointing at a break in the tree line, a logging road barely visible beneath the clutch of undergrowth. Trevor turned hard, and the truck lurched onto the rough trail. Pine branches lashed the windshield. The suspension groaned over exposed roots and hidden rocks. "Anyone else think this is madness?" Harrison said, gripping the dashboard as the truck tilted dangerously. "Chasing down strangers in the middle of nowhere?" "Yeah," Trevor replied curtly, "but we're doing it anyway." The trees finally cleared, revealing the edge of a wide field once tilled as farmland, a barren stretch of withered stubble and wild weeds. In its center lay the small white Cessna, its banner now a crumpled heap beside it. Trevor stopped the truck, the engine idling softly. They peered through the grimy windshield, taking in the scene. "No movement," Gustav noted. "The pilot might be injured." Then Anthony pointed sharply. "Look past the plane." At first, Trevor saw nothing, but then he detected movement. Figures were emerging from the tree line on the far side of the field, the familiar shuffling gait of walkers, tattered clothing, arms reaching out impetuously. "Walkers," Harrison breathed. "A fucking herd, thousands of them." "And the plane landed right in their path," Bobby added. Through the haze, Trevor made out frantic movement near the aircraft, people alive and scrambling from the cockpit as the dead closed in. "How many?" he asked, already reaching for his weapon. "3, Archer replied, his eyes narrowing. 2 men, 1 woman. "Decision time," Gustav said quietly. Trevor's hand tightened on the wheel. The promised supplies waiting in Elijah lay in the opposite direction. Any semblance of safety lay far behind. Ahead was only risk. Unknown people who might be allies, enemies, or doomed long before help arrived. He pressed down on the accelerator. "Hold on," he warned, as the truck lurched forward, bouncing unevenly toward the stranded plane and the advancing herd. "This is about to get messy." The others braced themselves, weapons drawn, eyes fixed on the chaos ahead. None dared voice the obvious truth. They were driving straight into danger for people they barely knew, all because a part of them desperately clung to the belief and hope that somewhere a safe place existed and wasn't just another lie in a broken world. The truck surged ahead, cutting through the tall grass. The walkers turned at the sound, their collective attention wavering between the wrecked plane and the fast-approaching vehicle. Trevor's knuckles gripped the wheel tightly. Sometimes one just had to choose which nightmare to face. The field stretched out in front of them like a deadly expanse, with the plane standing out as a white island amidst the swaying dead grass and advancing undead. Trevor floored the accelerator, causing the truck to jolt and shake as it traversed the rough terrain. Through the windshield he could see hundreds of walkers, a staggering, groaning crowd closing in on the crashed aircraft, where 3 living people frantically moved about, their rapid and frantic actions contrasting with the walkers' steady, relentless advance. "Jesus Christ," Harrison muttered, bracing himself against the dashboard. "It's a fucking walker convention." Gustav leaned forward, military training evident in his rapid assessment. They're spread thin on our side, concentrated to the north and east of the plane. "Migration pattern," Anthony observed with clinical detachment. "The herd was already moving this direction when the plane came down. The noise just accelerated their approach." The horde stretched across the field in uneven clusters, their decaying bodies in various states of decomposition. Some were fresh, their skin still holding the illusion of life, if not for the vacant eyes and awkward gaits. Others were months gone, clothing rotted away, flesh hanging in strips, bone visible through gaps where scavengers had been at work. Their collective stench reached the truck even through closed windows, a miasma of putrefaction that made Trevor's eyes water. "We'll never get through that," Nordberg said, his confidence faltering as the true size of the herd became apparent. Archer was already preparing his crossbow. "We don't need to get through all of them, just need to create a corridor." Trevor gripped the wheel tighter, calculating angles and distances. The truck could handle maybe 20 walkers before getting bogged down. There were 5 times that between them and the plane. I count 3 people, Bobby confirmed, squinting through the passenger window. They're on top of the plane now. The desperate trio had climbed atop the Cessna's fuselage, momentarily beyond the reaching hands of the dead. A man in aviator sunglasses stood at the highest point, firing his assault rifle at the walkers below. Beside him, another man, stockier, with a darker Hispanic or Mexican complexion, took shots with his pistol at any walker that got too close to the aircraft's wings. A woman crouched between them, her long dark hair whipping around her face as she frantically scanned their surroundings for escape. "What's the plan?" Harrison asked, checking his ammunition. Trevor made his decision. "We drive as close as we can, create noise to draw them away from the plane. You, Gustav, and Nordberg provide covering fire while Bobby, Anthony, and Archer get our new friends." "And if they're not friendly?" Gustav questioned. "Then we made a mistake," Trevor replied flatly. He pressed the accelerator to the floor. The truck surged forward, engines screaming in protest. The first walkers turned at the sound, their milky eyes tracking the approach, arms outstretched in eternal hunger. "Brace!" Trevor shouted as they hit the first cluster. Bodies thumped against the grille, some going under the wheels with sickening crunches, others bouncing off the hood. Black blood and viscera splattered across the windshield. Trevor flicked on the wipers, smearing the gore into greasy arcs that barely improved visibility. "We're drawing them," Harrison confirmed, tracking the herd's movement through his window. The walkers nearest the truck abandoned their pursuit of the plane, shuffling toward the louder, more immediate target. A pathway began to open between the vehicle and the aircraft, though still dotted with stumbling corpses. Trevor stopped the truck, 50 yards from the plane, close enough to reach it quickly, but far enough to create the diversion they needed. "Now!" he ordered. The group exploded from the vehicle in practiced formation. Harrison, Gustav, and Nordberg formed a protective semicircle, firing precise shots at the closest walkers. Bobby, Anthony, and Archer sprinted toward the plane, weaving between the dead with desperate agility. Trevor remained behind the wheel, hand on the horn. The blaring sound drew even more of the herd away from the plane, creating the corridor they needed. Through the gore-streaked windshield, he watched Bobby reach the aircraft first, calling up to the stranded survivors. The pilot responded immediately, sliding down the plane's side and dropping to the ground with military precision. The woman followed, her movements equally confident. The stockier man hesitated, frantically kicking at a walker that clutched at his dangling foot before finally jumping down. Anthony reached them, gesturing frantically toward the truck. The group began moving, forming a tight cluster with the newcomers in the center. Archer took point, his crossbow dropping walkers with silent efficiency, retrieving bolts as they passed fallen corpses. From the truck, Trevor could see the plan unraveling. The walkers he'd drawn away were now closing in behind his friends, cutting off their return path. More kept emerging from the tree line, an endless procession of the dead, as if the noise had awakened every corpse within miles. Harrison seemed to realize it too. He abandoned his position, racing toward the others, firing precisely as he moved. "The truck!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the moans of the dead and the continuing horn. "Get to the truck!" The group changed course, veering toward Trevor's position. The stocky newcomer stumbled, nearly going down as a walker lunged for him. The woman spun back, driving a knife into the creature's eye socket with practiced ease. Their hands connected as she pulled him forward, the gesture intimate and desperate. Gustav and Nordberg were down to hand weapons now, preserving ammunition as the herd thickened around them. Gustav's knife moved like an extension of his arm, dropping walkers with efficient, almost mechanical precision. Nordberg wielded a machete, each swing taking a head or disabling a grasping limb. The distance between the group and the truck shrank, but so did the safe space around them. Walkers closed in from all sides now, a tightening noose of gnashing teeth and clutching hands. "Come on!" Trevor shouted uselessly, knowing they couldn't hear him over the horn and the moans. He considered driving closer, but feared hitting someone in the chaos. Archer went down first, a walker emerging unexpectedly from beneath a clump of tall grass to grab his ankle. He rolled, narrowly avoiding the snapping jaws, nearly dropping his crossbow in the process. Bobby turned back, driving his knife into the walker's temple, but two more immediately took its place. The pilot proved his worth then, stepping forward with calm precision to dispatch both creatures with a combat knife that seemed to materialize from nowhere. The group reformed, tighter now, each survivor covering another's blind spot in the dance of the desperate. They were 30 yards from the truck when the herd's leading edge reached Trevor's position. Hands slapped against the windows, smearing them with blackened blood and yellowed fluids. Faces pressed against the glass, jaws working mindlessly, eyes empty of everything but hunger. The truck rocked as more bodies pushed against it, threatening to tip it over through sheer mass. Trevor abandoned the horn, grabbing his pistol instead. He needed to help clear a path for the others. He cracked the window just enough to extend the barrel, firing at the walkers directly between the approaching group and the truck. Bodies fell, creating momentary gaps that were quickly filled by more of the dead. But the group was making progress, now just 20 yards away, then 15. Trevor could see their faces clearly now, the strain, the fear, the determination not to die in this forgotten field. 10 yards became 5. The pilot reached the truck first, yanking open the rear door and practically throwing the woman inside. The stocky man followed, then Anthony and Bobby. Archer scrambled in next, bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but otherwise intact. "Go!" Gustav shouted as he and Harrison provided covering fire for Nordberg, who'd been separated from the group by a surge of walkers. Nordberg fought with desperate energy, his machete a silver arc cutting through the press of bodies. But for every walker he dropped, two more shambled forward. His path to the truck narrowed, then disappeared entirely. "Nordberg!" Trevor shouted, half out of the truck now, despite the danger. The former cop looked up, meeting Trevor's eyes across the sea of the dead. His expression shifted from panic to resignation. He nodded once, a gesture of understanding, of acceptance, then turned to face the herd, machete raised. Harrison grabbed Trevor's shoulder, pulling him back. "We have to go." "We can't leave him," Trevor protested, though he knew Harrison was right. The truck was surrounded now, the weight of bodies against it growing by the second. Any longer and they'd be overrun. Gustav fired 3 precise shots, creating a momentary path for Nordberg. "Move your ass, Milton," he bellowed. Nordberg seized the opportunity, cutting down 2 more walkers before diving through the gap. He hit the ground in a roll, came up running and hurled himself at the truck just as Gustav slammed the door shut behind him. "Drive!" Gustav ordered, his voice tight with controlled panic. Trevor didn't need to be told twice. He stomped on the accelerator, feeling the resistance as the truck pushed against the wall of bodies. For a horrible moment, they didn't move. Then the front walkers went down under the wheels and they were rolling, crushing a path through the herd. Bodies thumped against the undercarriage. Hands clawed at the windows. A face appeared directly in front of Trevor, its jaw unhinged. Teeth snapping against the glass inches from his face. The truck kept moving, gaining momentum, leaving bits of the dead in its wake. They broke free of the main concentration, plowing through the tall grass toward the road. Behind them, the walkers turned with agonizing slowness, still drawn by the noise but unable to match their speed. In the rearview mirror, Trevor watched as the white plane disappeared beneath a wave of grasping hands and hungry mouths. The banner that had promised safety lay trampled in the dirt, its message lost beneath the shambling feet of the dead. The newcomers huddled in the back, breathing hard, eyes wide with the particular expression of those who had faced death and unexpectedly survived. Nobody spoke. There was nothing to say that the pounding of their hearts wasn't already screaming. The truck bounced back onto the logging road, branches whipping against the sides as they fled, the horror behind them. Trevor's hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly. His mind replayed the image of Nordberg's face across the sea of walkers. That moment of acceptance, of understanding that death was not just possible, but probable. They'd been lucky today. They all knew it wouldn't last. The truck crawled through the thinning edges of the horde, Trevor keeping the speed low to avoid drawing more attention. Corpses shambled past the windows, some turning to follow with vacant curiosity, others continuing their mindless migration uninterrupted. Gustav kept watch through the passenger window, counting their dwindling numbers, when his hand suddenly shot up in the universal signal to stop. "Hold up," he whispered, as if the dead might overhear. "Look at that, what the hell am I seeing?" Trevor eased off the accelerator, letting the truck idle forward. The engine's low rumble seemed thunderous in the eerie silence that had fallen over the cab. Every head turned toward Gustav's side of the vehicle, bodies leaning to peer through the smeared glass. At first, Trevor saw nothing unusual, just another cluster of walkers moving through a gap in the trees. Then the cluster parted slightly, revealing something impossible. A woman walked among them. She moved with deliberate grace, her stride smooth and unhurried. Tall and slender, she navigated between the corpses as if they were merely inconvenient pedestrians on a crowded sidewalk. Her dark skin gleamed with a fine sheen of sweat, standing in stark contrast to the grey pallor of the dead surrounding her. Her hair was a tangle of black dreadlocks cascading down her back like serpents awakening from slumber. "Is she—" Anthony couldn't finish the thought. "She's alive," Archer confirmed, his keen eyes narrowing. "Look how she moves." The woman wore fitted leather armor patched together from what might have once been motorcycle gear. A long, curved sword. A katana hung across her back, its handle worn and wrapped in faded red cloth. But most disturbing were her companions. Two walkers shuffling alongside her, connected to her by crude chains wrapped around their necks. "There," Bobby's voice faltered. "Neutered," Anthony finished, scientific curiosity overriding his shock. "She's removed their arms and their jaws." The mutilated walkers staggered beside the woman like grotesque pets, their stumps cauterized black, their faces distorted by the absence of lower jaws. They made no attempt to attack her. Without arms to grab or mouths to bite, they had been rendered harmless, mobile camouflage in a world of predators. "She's using them as cover," Gustav observed with grudging respect. "Their scent masks hers." The newly rescued pilot chimed in, his aviator sunglasses pushed up on his forehead. "I saw something like this once. A guy near Rome had a walker on a stick, kept the others away. But nothing like this." The woman seemed to sense their scrutiny. Her head turned slowly toward the truck, her expression betraying neither fear nor hope, just the cold calculation of a survivor assessing potential threat. A machete hung at her hip, its blade darkened with old blood. Her lips formed a perpetually crooked line of disinterest, as if she'd long ago forgotten how to smile, or why anyone would bother. "We should talk to her," Bobby suggested. "She might need help." Harrison snorted. "Does she look like she needs our help?" Trevor studied the woman through the windshield. She had stopped moving, her captive walkers swaying slightly beside her. The other dead paid her no attention, shuffling past as if she were invisible. Her stance was balanced, ready, a fighter's pose that promised swift violence to anyone who approached carelessly. "We can't just leave her," Bobby protested. Trevor tightened his jaw. "She's surviving in her own way. We should respect that and move on." Trevor made his decision. He rolled down his window a few inches, enough to be heard, not enough for danger. "Hey!" he called, keeping his voice low enough not to attract the wider horde. "You okay?" The woman's eyes, dark, alert, wary, fixed on Trevor's face. For a moment she didn't respond, evaluating him with the careful precision of someone who had learned the hard way that humans were often more dangerous than the dead. Trevor raised a hand in a tentative wave. "We've got room," he offered, though even as he said it, he questioned the wisdom of bringing this strange, feral-looking woman into their already complicated group. With deliberate slowness, she raised her own hand in acknowledgement, The gesture wasn't acceptance or rejection, merely recognition of one survivor to another. Her eyes swept over the truck, and with a gentle nod of admiration for their bold rescue, she turned away. The woman tugged gently on her walker's chains, guiding them deeper into the trees. Before disappearing into the shadow of the forest, she turned back once more, her chin dipped in a subtle nod. Not quite thanks, not quite farewell. Then she was gone, swallowed by the undergrowth with a silence that suggested she'd been doing this walk with the dead for a long time. "Did that just happen?" Nordberg asked, no one in particular. Trevor rolled up his window and engaged the gear shift. The truck resumed its careful progress through the last scattered walkers, leaving the strange encounter behind. It was time to meet their new acquaintances and get to the diner. The newcomers sat awkwardly in the back of the truck, the stale air thickening with sudden tension. Narrowed eyes flickered from face to unfamiliar face as a heavy, distrustful silence descended. The truck's rusted frame groaned under the added weight, an ominous welcome. The pilot spoke first, his voice flat and disinterested. "Name's Clint Nankervis, Army aviator." He leaned back against the truck wall, crossing his arms. His gaze drifted lazily over the others, as if the whole situation, the crash, the rescue, was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Trevor and Nordberg exchanged a glance. This Clint character seemed oddly detached for someone who had just narrowly escaped death. His indifference raised hackles, mistrust prickling under their skin. Next to Clint, a muscular man with a clenched jaw introduced himself through gritted teeth. "Carlos Garcia, Army truck driver." His dark eyes bored into Clint with an intensity that could melt steel. The air between them practically crackled with unspoken animosity. The survivors shifted uneasily. Whatever issues lay between these two men, it was clear as day that resentment simmered dangerously beneath the surface. A woman with caramel skin and thick black hair pulled into a ponytail spoke up next, her voice warm and conciliatory. "I'm Amy Garcia." She slid her hand into Carlos's, interlacing their fingers. "Carlos is my husband." Yet even as she held tightly to Carlos, Amy's eyes kept flickering to Clint. There was an undeniable pull, a magnetism in her gaze that belied her affectionate gesture toward her husband. Carlos's jaw twitched as he caught Amy's wandering gaze. His fingers tightened almost painfully around hers, as if he could physically pull her attention back to him. The move did not go unnoticed by the others. Harrison leaned close to Trevor, keeping his voice low. "Is it just me, or do you get the feeling there's something going on there?" He nodded subtly toward the three newcomers. Trevor's mouth pressed into a grim line. "Definitely some kind of history. I don't like it. We need to watch them closely." As the two groups sized each other up, the tension grew thick enough to cut with a knife. Mistrust hung heavy in the air, suspicion oozing from every pore. Clint, apparently oblivious to the effect his behavior was having, casually examined his nails. "So here's the deal. We can get you fuel and ammunition. In return, all we ask is safe passage to Jasper." Carlos nodded stiffly. "We've got people there, a community. We can help you out, but we'd need a ride home in return." The survivors huddled together, discussing the proposal in hushed tones, heavy with reluctance. While the offer of fuel and ammunition was desperately needed, the strange dynamics between Clint, Carlos, and Amy made them hesitant to fully trust these newcomers. "We need those supplies," Nordberg muttered, "but I don't like this. Those three are trouble, mark my words." "Agreed," Trevor said grimly, "but what choice do we have? We won't make it far without fuel." Anthony nodded. "We take the deal, but we also stick to the original plan and check out that diner in LJ first. See what we can scavenge." Decision made. Trevor turned back to the newcomers. "All right, we're in, but we need to make a supply stop first. There's a diner up ahead in LJ that might have some supplies we could use." Clint shrugged, seemingly indifferent. "Fine by me." To be continued.